All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video. An interesting article I read today on Bleacher Report. It was entitled Roster Holes the 49ers Must Fill Before Training Camp. It's written by a guy named Joe Tanzi. We're going to talk about that article coming up next, where we agree, where we disagree. It's all next. But first, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They got 2 locations, and they're open from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Go say hi to Damon. Go say hi to Mary. Get some brisket and tell them that Krug sent you. And this video is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Check the link in the description. Use the promo code Krug, K-R-U-E-G, and they will match you up to your first $100. Well, the guy's name is Joe Tanzi. He writes for Bleacher Report. He's got an article out right now. The roster holes the 49ers must fill before training camp. And he's got 3 different areas that he feels they must fill before training camp. And I don't want to rip the guy, but I think he's just got this thing so wrong. And let's just go right into it. The first, the veterans are set to report to camp on July 23rd. And we'll see the first practices probably the day or 2 after that. So July 24th, July 25th, roughly, is when 49er training camp will officially begin on the practice field with the veterans and the rookies all reporting. And so now that's a couple weeks away. And now he's saying that these 3 roster holes have to be filled before training camp. And the first one he has is cornerback depth. You know, it's funny because the 49ers, I think, most teams keep 5 corners on a roster. That's about average. You might see a team that carries a 6th, but for the most part, it's 5 corners. 5 corners for, or some combination of 10 safeties and corners. So some teams keep 5 safeties, 5 corners. Some teams keep 6 corners, 4 safeties, but it's generally 10 defensive backs that are on a roster. It could vary. There could be a team that keeps 9. There could be a team that keeps 11. But for the most part, you're looking at 10 combined, either safeties or corners. And the Niners typically go with 4 safeties and maybe 5, maybe 6 corners. Sometimes they go with 9 DBs instead of 10. So if you look at their corners this year and just count it out, I'm not worried about who starts or who's backing up. Just straight, how many NFL caliber corners do you have on your camp roster? How many NFL caliber corners do you have in camp? To me, this is a major, major question for lots of teams, because if you don't have at least 5, you're probably not deep enough. And there's lots of teams that have 2 or 3 good corners, and then corner 4 and corner 5 are just borderline NFL. So the 49ers are one of the deeper teams, I think, at this spot. They've got Mooney Ward, who's going to man the left cornerback spot. Then you've got Diamador Lenore, who could be the nickelback, or he could be the starting right corner. And then you drafted Renardo Green out of Florida State in the 2nd round. So he might play nickel, he might play corner, he might play free safety, because they're pretty thin at free safety. So right there, you've got 3: Mooney Ward, Renardo Green, Diamador Lenore. Then you've got Ambry Thomas, who was a 3rd-round pick in 2021, and at times has played some really, really good football for the 49ers. That's corner number 4. If you want, I mean, in no particular order. That's 4 NFL caliber corners that you got right there. All right, you signed Isaac Yiadom away from the Saints. So that's 5. So right there, you've got a full complement of NFL caliber corners, in my opinion. But that doesn't include Samuel Womack III. That's corner number 6. Darrell Luter, who was a 5th-round pick in last year's draft. That's corner number 7. Doesn't include Chase Lucas, who came over as an unrestricted free agent from Detroit. That's corner number 8. And then doesn't include Rock Ya-Sin. That's corner number 9. And they also have Keeman Hall. So technically, and I'm not a Keeman Hall fan, but that's corner number 10. So I don't think Keeman Hall's NFL, roster worthy. But Luter is, and so's Ya-Sin, and so's Chase Lucas, and so's Womack, and so's Ambry, and so's Yiadom, and so's Green, and so's Lenore, and so's Mooney. So that's 9 corners. that the 49ers have in camp that are all NFL caliber. So for him to say, oh, yeah, one of the roster holes is they need more depth at corner. And he's suggesting guys like Stephon Gilmore or J.C. Jackson, Xavier Howard, all guys that, once upon a time were great players. I mean, Gilmore might have been the best corner in football for a while. Heck, Xavier Howard might have been the best corner in football for a while. But these guys are long in the tooth. They're old. All these guys are, overpaid and lost physicality and lost speed. And I don't think any of those guys necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't mind Xavier Howard if you could get Xavier Howard, but you really don't need him. As I said, Mooney, Lenore, Renardo Green, Ambry Thomas, Isaac Yadam, Samuel Womack, Darrell Luter, Rock Yassin, Chase Lucas. That's 9 corners right there. So even if you wanted to go with 6, you got to cut 3 of those guys. So who are you going to cut out of that group? I mean, seriously, who are you cutting? Chase Lucas, okay. Now you got to cut 2 more. Maybe Rock Yassin, okay. Now you got to cut 1. You got to, between Ambry and Womack and Luter, probably one of those guys, or Yadam, probably one of those guys is getting cut. And all those guys I think are good. So they're deep at corner. So I would push back. Joe Tansey, they do not need greater depth at the corner. Now, if he took more time and looked at the safety position, now I think the 49ers do need help. Talanoa Fonga's coming off an ACL. He may or may not be ready for week 1. Jair Brown just played more games last year than he's ever played before, and he said that his body was still fatigued, weeks and weeks after the Super Bowl ended. So he's now going into his sophomore year. So he's one of the starters. And then you drafted Malik Mustafa in the 4th round out of Wake Forest. He probably steps in for Hufanga as a starter to, opposite Jair Brown. Then you got George Odom, who's a terrific special teams player, but he's really not a great player from scrimmage. So if you had Hufanga healthy and Mustafa made the team, those are your 4 corners. But you also still have Eric Harris and Taylor Hawkins, who are more practice squad types, and Jalen Mahoney, who was an undrafted free agent. So you got 3 kind of camp body type guys. And so you really are, you've got 4 safeties, and you're probably going to go with 4 safeties. So, yeah, I mean, if you wanted to make an argument that they could use one more safety because Eric Harris and Taylor Hawkins are just, practice squad guys, and Jalen Mahoney is also kind of just a practice squad type guy, talent-wise. Yeah, you could make an argument that the Niners could use one more safety. Now, if you believe Renardo Green can play free safety, then maybe they're fine. They're fine. But I would push back on the notion that the Niners need cornerback depth. I think they're really deep at corner. If anything, in the secondary, they could use safety depth. So that's one thing I would disagree with. The other one is Joe Tansey says the 49ers need defensive tackle depth. And they did lose Eric Armstead, and they signed Malik Collins, and they have Javon Hargrave coming back. They also signed Jordan Elliott. You have Kevin Givens coming back, as well as T.Y. McGill, Kalia Davis. And then you added a couple of intriguing, flyers, one on Evan Anderson, who they gave $280,000 guaranteed to sign as an undrafted free agent. And then Shaquille Brown, who they lost out on to Tennessee as an undrafted free agent a year ago, but then he had an ankle injury and the Titans cut him loose. So now the Niners have Shaquille Brown and Evan Anderson, and they're 2 really exciting young defensive tackles that potentially could beat out Kalia Davis and T.Y. McGill and maybe even Kevin Givens. So I would say between Collins and Hargrave, first of all, you got 10 defensive linemen make the roster, 5 tackles, 5 ends. So your 5 tackles are Hargrave and Malik Collins, Kevin Givens, Jordan Elliott, and 1 between Kalia Davis, T.Y. McGill, Evan Anderson, and Shaquille Brown. Out of those 4 guys, most likely, if everybody's healthy, only one of those 4 guys can make the roster. So I think they're plenty deep at defensive tackle. If you're looking for where they're thin up front, it's defensive end. You got Nick Bosa and Leonard Floyd. Yatir Gross-Matos is signed, so he might be your starter on first and second down. So you got those are your 3 defensive ends. But defensive end 4 and 5, very much up in the air. Drake Jackson didn't play a lot last year, has not really established himself as an NFL edge rusher of note yet. Very much a question mark. Robert Beal barely played in college and barely played for the Niners last year. He's big, he's fast, he's got explosiveness, but he's barely played. Austin Bryant was never active last year. The other guys are more practice squad types. So the 49ers have to come up with, I mean, they got 3 good defensive ends, Bosa, Floyd, and Gross Matos. But defensive end 4 and defensive end 5, who forget being on the roster, those guys are going to play and get regular reps. Drake Jackson, love Drake Jackson, great guy, big question mark. Robert Beal, love Robert Beal, major question mark. So it's interesting. Joe Tanzi says the Niners must fill these holes before training camp, and he goes with cornerback, not safety. When they're deep at corner and very thin at safety, and then he goes defensive tackle depth, despite the fact they're very deep at defensive tackle and relatively thin at defensive end. So it's like he's got 2 of the right general position groups, D-line defensive backs, but he's got the wrong positions. They're deep at defensive tackle. They're deep at corner. They're thin at safety. They're thin at defensive end. So, that cracked me up. And then the third one, he's got as right tackle, and obviously Colton McKivitz is the starting right tackle. The Niners brought in Chris Hubbard as a veteran from the Titans to compete with him at right tackle. There's also Brandon Parker, who was brought in from the Raiders. He also could compete at tackle. And then Jalen Moore is thought to be the leader in the clubhouse as the swing tackle. And John Lynch has stated, hey, we like our tackles. That's why we didn't go add a bunch of tackles. We like Trent Williams, who's probably still the best left tackle in the game. They like Colton McKivitz, and they like Jalen Moore as their swing tackle. So most teams keep 3, and for the Niners, that's their 3. As far as, can I see what Tanzi's argument is by saying they need help at right tackle? Sure. But the guys he throws out are Donovan Smith, David Bakhtiari, Charles Leno, and Jason Peters. And all those guys are done. Those guys are all old. Jason Peters is ancient. Donovan Smith is stiff. Bakhtiari's body's beat up. Leno's probably the most intriguing of those guys, and he ain't great. I would say Jalen Moore is probably better than Leno. So Joe Tanzi from Bleacher Report writes an article on the roster holes the Niners must fill, and he lists cornerback, despite the fact they're deep at corner, defensive tackle, despite the fact they're deep at defensive tackle, and right tackle, despite the fact that there is nobody available that's better than the guys they currently have on their roster. So I just think it's hilarious. These people that don't really cover the team and don't know shit. And I hate to say it, abruptly. I'm sure Joe Tanzi's a nice guy. All right, let's have a real discussion about what are the real holes on this roster that need to be filled before training camp. Okay, let's look at it objectively. Do you need a receiver? No. You're loaded. You got lots of receivers. Do you need an offensive lineman? No, because there's no offensive lineman out there to get. So, there's nobody to trade for. And, I don't think there's a tackle on the market that could beat out Trent Williams, Colton McKivitz, or Jalen Moore. And the Niners they like Aaron Banks. Jake Brendel was a Pro Bowl alternate a year ago. They like Feliciano. They just drafted Pooney. They like Barch. They like Burford. They just drafted Jarrett Kingston. They just signed Bryson Mays and Drake Nugent. They love Nick Zakelj. I think they're, I'm not saying their offensive line is good or great or by any stretch you can't improve it, but there's nobody out there to get. So you're not improving the offensive line. You're not improving the wide receiver core. You're not improving the running back spot, and you don't need a fullback. So, because you got Juszczyk and you got Garendo sitting there, right? Looks like he could be a replacement. So offensively, on that side of the football, if there's any need for any additions, it would be a tight end. And, George Kittle is your number 1 tight end. Braden Willis, I think, really looked good in the minicamp. I think he's going to be a year 2 bust out candidate. I love what I see out of Mason Pline, the rookie from Furman. Cam Latu was a 3rd-round pick a year ago. We'll see what he brings this summer. Logan Thomas is a veteran who's been in this league a while. You could make an argument that they're a little thin at tight end, but I don't see anybody on the street that would be better or more worthy than the guys they got. To me, if you go with Kittle and Willis and just go with 2 tight ends, you're fine there. You could also go Kittle and Willis and Thomas, or you could go Kittle and Willis and Thomas and put Pline on the practice squad. But overall, I think you're probably okay there. Quarterback, Josh Dobbs and Brandon Allen are not very good. And I don't think they can win any games behind Brock Purdy. But you also have Tanner Mordecai, and Mordecai has shown some decent things. So you're probably deep enough really at every spot on the offensive side of the football. So where do you need help? I think you're absolutely going to see the exact same thing this summer that you saw last summer, in that the Niners, after 10 days of camp, suddenly are signing defensive ends. Here comes Taco Charlton, and here comes this guy and that guy. They're going to do the same damn thing this year. Watch. Bosa, Leonard Floyd, Yatir Gross-Matos, those guys are going to make the roster as your top 3 defensive ends. But defensive end 4 and 5, Robert Beal barely played last year in training camp. He got hurt. He barely played. If that happens again, they're going to bring in somebody new. Drake Jackson barely played last year. He played week 1, had 3 sacks, played 3-4 more weeks. I think by week 6 or 7, he was on the IR, done for the year. So Drake didn't play and Beal didn't play. And if those guys continue to not play, I would say defensive end. I mean, as sure as I'm sitting here, the 49ers are going to need reinforcements at defensive end. Not that I don't believe in Drake, not that I don't believe in Beal, but you can never have enough pass rushers. Guys get hurt. And they have 3 dependable pass rushers and 2 prospects with question marks. And they need 5 defensive ends, none of which can be question marks. They all have to be guys who can play. So I would say defensive end. What's a spot that the Niners could upgrade? I don't know if I would say upgrade before the start of camp, but I would say upgrade before week 1 of the NFL season. Defensive end, for sure, is on that list. Linebacker, they're pretty deep. Even without Dre Greenlaw, they added Devondre Campbell. They have D. Winters. They signed Ezekiel Turner. They still have the veteran Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles. Curtis Robinson's a very good special teamer. They drafted Tatum Bethune. It's year 2 for Jalen Graham, who I think's a stud. I think Jalen Graham's a monster. So I think they're okay at linebacker. I really do. Corner, they're deep. Safety, they could use somebody. So, Hufanga may be back in week 1, but he may not be. Jair Brown, needs a running mate. Maybe they go after a Justin Simmons. Maybe they try to add a Lewis Seen from Minnesota or Richie Grant from Atlanta. Maybe those guys get cut at the end of the cut down at the end of August, and maybe the Niners pluck one of those guys or trade for one of those guys ahead of time, seeing that those guys are caught in a numbers game on their particular team. To me, you're deep at safety, you're deep at corner, you're deep at linebacker, you're deep at defensive tackle. You're thin at safety, and you're thin at defensive end. So you're definitely going to need some defensive end help. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And unless Malik Mustafa just steps in and looks great, or Jalen Mahoney is a major, major surprise, you're probably going to need some safety help as well. So those would be the 2 spots. And if you wanted to say a 3rd spot, I'd probably say quarterback, because I think Dobbs is lousy. I think Brandon Allen's lousy. And I think Tanner Mordecai is totally unproven. And I think if the 49ers lose Brock Purdy for a 5, 6, 7 game stretch, their season's done, because they're not going to win any games. They're not going to win games with Brandon Allen. They're not going to win games with Josh Dobbs. I'm just not a believer in those guys. Now, I wasn't much more of a believer last year in Sam Darnold, but Purdy stayed healthy, and hopefully he stays healthy again this year. If he stays healthy, no problem. If he doesn't stay healthy, Niners are not going to win any of those games. And I'll make the prediction right now. I think Mordecai is going to outplay Brandon Allen or Dobbs or both, possibly both. But if you said, where could they use depth and help? Edge rusher, for sure. Safety, for sure. And if you wanted to add one more piece to the puzzle, I think maybe you could go for a veteran tight end. If you really, because why? Because Pline's an undrafted free agent rookie, and Latu had never played last year, so he essentially is a rookie. And Braden Willis played 0 last year, so he's basically a rookie. So and Saubert and Tongues and Logan Thomas, in my opinion, are just guys. I mean, Thomas is the best of those three, but none of those guys is good. So you got 3 decently intriguing tight end prospects, but essentially they're all rookies because nobody's ever played. So I would say the one need on offense, if you could find one more dependable, tight end that you really like, that would be intriguing. And on defense, a defensive end or a safety. So though, to me, sorry, Joe Tansey from Bleacher Report, cornerback depth, they're plenty deep. Defensive tackle depth, they're plenty deep. Right tackle depth, the guys they have are better than the guys they can get. So those 3 spots, no. But safety depth, that's an issue. Defensive end depth, that's a major issue. And tight end depth, absolutely. You can find an established NFL tight end to put behind Kittle that you really like. That could be the area of need. So there you go. I kind of disagree with Joe Tansey. He says cornerback, defensive tackle, and right tackle. I'm saying safety, defensive end, and tight end as the positions of need. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krueger Show. Thanks to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video. And thanks to all of you guys for supporting the Krueger Show on YouTube.